Hello, everyone. We welcome you to Book Notes once again. We're so grateful that you're with us this evening as we continue our conversation with some of our great minds in our country, those who have written pieces of literature that will elevate your spirit, inspire your heart, cause you to think or to rethink the way that you have been looking at the world. We're delighted that tonight, I'm really excited that we have Dr. Earle Fisher from none other than Memphis, Tennessee, will be with us. I'll be introducing him a little bit later, but we want you to know several things, which you're excuse me, that you're with us tonight. One, we want you to have a conversation online. You can utilize the hashtag OM3 Book Notes. Utilize that hashtag. If you are on Twitter, we invite you to make sure that this conversation is going for those of you on Facebook. And also, please use the chat on YouTube. We are also going to be taking questions online so that you'll be able to present questions to our guest throughout the program. Feel free to communicate with us. Again, this is a dialogue and not a monologue. But again, we welcome you to Book Notes, and we are very excited that we have a very special guest this evening. But first, let's begin in prayer tonight, and let us go to the Lord in prayer. Gracious and most merciful God, in whom we live, move, and have our being, we thank you for this opportunity to be able to talk with a scholar, a teacher, a preacher, Dr. Earle Fisher, as he lifts up the work of Dr. Albert Cleage and the Shrine of the Black Madonna. We are grateful for the opportunity to place in cyberspace something good that will bless our community. And so we're grateful for the conversation that will take place tonight, and may the information that is conveyed, may it inspire and may it elevate. We offer this prayer right now in the mighty and awesome, majestic and powerful name of the Black Messiah, of the Liberator, the one we call Jesus, who is the Christ, we pray. And the people of God who love God may say amen. Well, as I mentioned, tonight we're excited. We're having a conversation with Dr. Earle Fisher. He is a graduate of the University of Memphis, PhD, specializing in rhetoric and religion and philosophy. He is also the pastor of the Abyssinia Baptist Church in Memphis, Tennessee, the Blackest church in Memphis and in Shelby County. He received his Master's of Divinity from the Memphis Theological Seminary, where he also teaches. And we're going to be having a conversation with about his dissertation, the book that he has written that focuses on one of our great ministers, but many people do not know Reverend Albert Cleage and how influential he has been, not only in the African American community, but in the United Church of Christ, which Trinity is a part of. So I thought it was appropriate that we would talk with this incredible scholar, teacher, and preacher, none other than Dr. Earle Fisher. And we welcome him to Book Notes tonight. Dr. Fisher, it is a delight to have you with us.
Dr. Moss, the delight is mostly mine. Thank you for your invitation and your hospitality. Salute to you and to the entire Trinity United Church of Christ family. I am deeply honored to be here and looking forward to this wonderful conversation.
Well, we are very grateful, and we're so very thankful that you made the decision to write a book on Reverend Albert Cleage. And as you mentioned in your book, there's not a lot of literature on Reverend Cleage. And if you could, for the audience, just share a little bit, one, how you were introduced to the work of Reverend Albert Cleage, and why you made the decision to do such a scholarly work on his rhetoric and his sermons, and a little bit about his life and his ministry.
Yeah, so again, thanks, man. And for those who don't know, please be very clear that Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III has an expense report that he owes to Abyssinian. that he has to pay because he preached for us for MLK Day this year and just tore everything down virtually. So cyberspace was not the same. So I'm still waiting on him to make good on that fee and that voice. No, seriously, Reverend Albert Cleage Jr. is somebody who I stumbled upon in 2012. I talk about this in the preface of the book. So as you mentioned, I graduated from Memphis Theological Seminary. I'm somebody who was, relatively engaged with Black liberation theology from the academic standpoint. I was familiar with James Cone and Dwight Hopkins and J.D. Otis Roberts. I was familiar with womanist theologians, Jackie Grant, Renita Weems, and Katie Geneva Cannon. And so after I graduated from Memphis Theological Seminary, I actually started teaching religious studies at first my alma mater, the HBCU in Memphis, the blackest school in Memphis and Shelby County, Lemoyne College. And I also got contracted to teach religious studies courses in contemporary theology at Rhodes College, which is one of the predominantly white and relatively prestigious liberal arts colleges in Memphis. And while I was at Rhodes College, I was constructing these religious studies courses that were supposed to be tackling contemporary issues in the realm of religious studies. And so I started thinking about a course called Gangster Theology, where I was going to construct how people in underworld environments conceive of and understand who and how God is. Now, some of this, and this to answer your question even further, insofar as like what drew me to Cleage so much, some of this is self-indulgent because I'm from Benton Harbor, Michigan. Folks in Trinity should know something about if you drive 94 east, like you're going to Detroit, 30 miles into Michigan, you get into one of the blackest cities, one of the most impoverished cities, and one of the toughest cities to grow up in, Benton Harbor, Michigan. So I was, in essence, trying to think about how people who I know, my friends, have constructed our understanding of who and how God is, and I wanted to put it in an academic context. So I was looking for resources, and I reached out to one of my mentors, Reverend Dr. Randall Bailey, Professor Emeritus at ITC. And I asked him, I gave him the concept for the course, and I asked him what he thought some good resources would be. He asked me to read William Jones's Is God a White Racist? So I started reading it, and I was familiar with the people who Jones was taking to task about Black liberation theology. Again, he said something about Cone. I'm like, okay, cool. He said something about J.D. Otis Roberts. I'm like, all right. He said something about Dwight Hopkins. I said, uh-huh. And he gets to this chapter. It's called Black Christian Nationalism. I'm like, what is this? And this guy, Albert Cleage Jr., I'm like, who was that? Oh, Detroit. Well, I mean, that's not Benton Harbor, but it's Michigan. I know something about Detroit. And at the time, I had been pastoring at Abyssinian for about 1.5 years. And I was in a personal struggle insofar as attempting to implement and institute some liberationist practices and philosophies in a relatively traditional Baptist context. And so the more I read what Jones said Cleage was saying, the more I said, well, wait a minute. I said that last Sunday. Or I was just teaching about this. I think at the time I was in a teaching series called Black Jesus, White Lies, Race in the Black Church. I spent like 22 weeks teaching about that. So long story less long, that is actually what caused me to stumble upon Cleage. I was so captivated by what I was reading, and it spoke to me with an ancestral wisdom that I had been longing for. Because as you know, in our field of ministry, those of us who are sincerely committed to Black liberation can feel like we're on an island all by ourselves, or that we're the only prophet who had not bowed down to Baal. I was lucky to have, among others, as a mentor and a predecessor in the academic realm, not only my pastor, who was a Trinitarian himself, Dr. Frank Anthony Thomas, but the person who coined the phrase rhetoric, race, and religion is Dr. Andre Johnson. Andre Johnson had been doing work on Bishop Henry McNeil Turner. And so as I was entering to the same program that both of them had graduated from, I felt like Dr. Johnson had really laid out the groundwork for how to take a historical figure who had been unstudied. There's not a lot out. Well, a lot might be relative. There's some things out clearly not enough for those of us who need to have more of a robust model for militancy in ministry in a very impactful way. So long story less long again. That's how I stumbled upon Cleage. I thought Dr. Johnson had laid the groundwork. And so I put it on the shelf and said, as soon as I get into the program proper and I'm able to, really lean in, then I'll do some historic research on what I'm interested in insofar as preaching is concerned, homiletics and rhetoric, and then the intersection of rhetoric, race, and religion.
That's really powerful. And the book, I got a commercial right now. If you want to pick up the book, Afterware Bookstore. It is owned by a sister. Come on now. We want to support Afterware, Sister Nzinga. They manage the Trinity Bookstore, and they're also in Oak Park. This is an academic text. I want to make sure that for those of you who are looking for a Bible study, this is not it. This is not Sunday school. This is an academic text, and will give you rich information of what Dr. Fisher has done around this incredible individual who reframes the way that Eurocentric theology that has embedded itself in the African-American community can be disrupted. So you'll see that coming across your screen, Afterware, and there may be some other books that you want to pick up. Come on now. We want to make sure that we are supporting and purchasing from our stores. Jeff Bezos has enough money already. So I want to ask you this, Dr. Fisher, because I had a personal relationship or a connection with Reverend Albert Cleage. I went to school with two of his ministers. They were both at Yale. One you had the opportunity to interview, Bishop Kamathi, the other being Bishop Olu, and they introduced me to Reverend Albert Cleage personally. And he was up in age, but he was still quite very funny and feisty in many ways. First, lay out for everyone what the study of rhetoric is, the program that you're part of, because you frame his sermons from this vantage point. So give us a concept for those who are going to be reading the book or may not have the opportunity to read the book. What this is. When I'm studying rhetoric, what does that mean?
Right. So it's the most general understanding of rhetoric is the study of the art of verbal persuasion. But that is more of a Eurocentric view of rhetoric itself. So it is about communication in all of its forms, and a more Afrocentric view of it is one that considers what it means to inform and to shape and to create things, not just to persuade people. And so as somebody who is interested in the art of preaching and somebody who is committed to the liberation of Black people, when I stumbled upon this guy and looked at his tenure of pastoral ministry, knowing how many sermons pastors have to preach on a regular basis, I knew that there was something that could be mined from his sermonic material that would be instructive. And I know you said earlier that it's an academic text, and I agree with that. However, I think it's also something that lay people can look at, maybe not for Bible study or maybe for Bible study, but definitely to get some seeds of the type of academic and philosophical conversations that people have been having inside of academic institutions and at kitchen tables in Black folks' houses for the last several centuries. So I knew that there was something within the sermons themselves, and that was an angle that I felt like other scholars, the foremost scholar of Albert Cleage to me is Dr. Jawanza Eric Clark, somebody who went to the Shrine of the Black Madonna, somebody who was an understudy of Cleage directly. And I'm grateful to have his endorsement and support of my scholarship. Nelson, as you mentioned earlier, Bishop Mbayu Chui, who was at Shrine number 1, which is the shrine in Detroit.
Oh, that's right.
For those that don't know, and I know you told me offline that you had an experience of the shrine in Atlanta. So people don't know that there's a Shrine of the Black Madonna in Detroit, in Atlanta, in Harlem, New York, in Houston, Texas. Bishop Aswad Walker is somebody who has signed off on my work as well. So I'm grateful to have that. But for me, it was about trying to get into some of his rhetorical strategies, like how is he working to reconstitute his congregation while he is embedded in the front lines of the Black Power movement in Detroit? Because I forecasted what was going to happen with the Black church in the 21st century as the Black Lives Matter movement was emerging. Most people don't know this, but I started the PhD program in August of 2014 at the University of Memphis. And literally 2 weeks after I started the program, Mike Brown was killed in St. Louis. The year after, a brother named Darius Stewart was killed by a police officer in Memphis, Tennessee. And so I was literally embedded in the same type of social and political context that Cleage was embedded in the Black Power movement in Detroit, here in Memphis. And so it was in some ways kind of therapeutic in a weird way, because it allowed me an opportunity to take some space that was not so deeply entrenched in the congregational context, because it was not just about immediately what was happening to parishioners at Abyssinian, but it gave me some time to think through strategically what one of our venerable ancestors did in these moments and how we could adapt that to what was happening right now. So those are some of the things that I feel like Cleage, the reclamation project of Cleage's work, as I might say it. So I'm fascinated by his sermonic stuff, even though I don't consider him to be a homiletician. He wouldn't argue and say that he was one. Either you and I can laugh and joke about how he would take a text and sometimes not even be preaching about that text at all. He'll take a text from Matthew and be preaching all about what was happening in Hebrews or in the Exodus and all of that other stuff, which for us would be homiletical suicide. Nevertheless, the content, though, the content is something that's rich, and I wanted to study some of his rhetorical strategies and his form.
You raised a question in terms of actually structure-wise of what Cleage does, and I heard Bishop Kamathi, he mentioned it. It made sense to me because when I first read and some of Reverend Cleage's sermons, not just in the Black Messiah, but they used to publish his sermons. They had a newsletter, and I was saying this is different. And it wasn't not the information, it was the structure. And then it dawned on me in the conversation. He says, he's preaching doctrine for the church. He's trying to reframe. I'm constantly trying to reframe because he sees himself as someone who is trying to re-educate, miseducated. So it's almost a repeat. And I want to ask that you do something for us. I want you to paint the picture. Because again, I think there are probably some people who are on who are not familiar with Reverend Cleage. Paint the picture of 1967 before Black Messiah came out in 67, wasn't it? Or
that was published in 67 before James Cone and Black Power. Just for the record.
Okay. Yeah, paint the picture of this person in Detroit, the context, and then what is he preaching? What is he saying that is going to be different than if you went to hear a C.L. Franklin?
Yes. And that's loaded. Here's where I think I can paint it in a clear and concise amount of time. The Algiers motel murder that most folks became familiar with when the movie Detroit came out a couple years ago. I was listening to commentary about the movie, and I kept saying to my wife Denise, I'm like, Algiers motel, that sounds so familiar to me. It's something. I go and grab the Black Messiah, and in the first chapter he is describing what's called the People's Tribunal. Cleage and the Shrine of the Black Madonna organized a makeshift trial for the police officers that were engaged in the Algiers motel murder and the kidnapping of, some of the Black residents there. At that tribunal held at the Shrine of the Black Madonna, you had notables like Coleman Young. Rosa Parks was one of the jurists. You had Black judges. You had, Black lawyers and attorneys who were there. So Cleage is called by PBS the most controversial pastor of that age. So what you would hear is him being unapologetic in wedding together theology with sociology and political psychology. He would be unapologetic in describing the nature of the Black Revolution in Jesus's day, in the days of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and into the days of Antonio and Jamal and Tanisha, you know. So I think that's something that his unadulterated and explicit grounding in what we would now call political theology is something that I think he added in an Afrocentric, or really a Pan-African frame, that I think was uncommon in his days, that you would have to build upon some of Bishop Henry Neal Turner and maybe some, you know, of the forerunners of the Christian faith in North America to try to find some parallels.
And what's so beautiful, and you do such a great job with it, is Cleage is rooted in Black religiosity. At the same time, he is also an alternative to so much what is being preached and shaped in the culture. But I hope people don't miss what you just said, in the fact that Cleage is speaking, doing a tribunal. Coleman Young is present.
Yeah.
Rosa Parks is present. And that's uniquely Detroit. You know, folks from Detroit are very proud.
Right.
That's a very Detroit
Yeah.
framing, to be able to bring together all of these particular elements when speaking. Now,
let me interject something, Dr. Moss, because you're opening up a very important window for us to discuss something that's not in the book that I think is valuable. So Cleage and the Shrine of the Black Madonna organizes politically what's called the Black Slate, that is still in existence to this day. The Black Slate is basically the trustees of the shrine, and they organize a political movement such that you can't get elected to office in Detroit without getting an endorsement from the Black Slate. So the Black Slate is the vehicle that helps Coleman Young become the first Black mayor in Detroit. The Black Slate helps Kwame Kilpatrick become the mayor of Detroit. And so the type of political power that Cleage was able to yield in a city rooted in Black nationalism in ways that other major metropolitan cities just weren't and still have not been rooted in, I think is remarkable. And the last thing I'll say about this is what Malcolm said. Malcolm said, I'm telling every Christian in Detroit to go to Albert Cleage Church. Folks don't know that the message to the grassroots that Malcolm gave at Detroit.
That's right.
Go back and listen and see how many times he says, as Reverend Cleage said, because Cleage spoke before Malcolm at that same event. Cleage was the reason that Malcolm came to town. It was almost like the counter conference to C.L. Franklin's conference that Cleage thought was a whole lot more moderate. So there's a lot to explore there. I couldn't get into all of it into the book, of course, because I was trying to center on the intersection of rhetoric, race, and religion so far as those sermons were concerned. But I think it's important to note like what Cleage offered for the broader landscape of Black power and Black politics in Detroit.
And Cleage does something, and you lift it up so powerfully in your book, that Cleage's rhetoric around the Black Messiah. And he does something that, and maybe you help us out with this. He does something that many other academics refuse to do. So Cone, sociologically Black.
Yeah.
Cleage says Jesus is Black, period. Let's just roll with it, and then let's move on to the next piece. Stop saying sociological, ontological Blackness. He's Black.
Existentially Black, right? Black in skin.
That's right.
Black in politics. It reminds me of what Malefi says in Afrocentricity, that Afrocentricity is a mode and thought and action centered in the interest of African people, and that it evolves such that Black is anything that stands against oppression in all of its forms. And so Cleage is saying, yes, it's important to recognize Jesus historically, but really like a non-person. He is not some blonde-haired, blue-eyed white Messiah. And this is important in that time frame, and still important today, not only because of the psychology that gets embedded in Black folks, the anti-Blackness such that God can't even look like you, or God's representatives, God's Messiah, God's son, God's children can't even look like us, but moreover, because it is contesting the historical inaccuracies of what it means for Black people to engage in political revolution in a country, a culture, and a context controlled by rich white people. And in a country, culture, and a context that is rooted in militaristic revolution but somehow does not allow Black people to engage in religious postures where we can affirm that same level of militant revolution.
Now, it's interesting that I'd like to get your thought on this. So Clegg made a statement. He's made it several times. You may have come across it. That when asked about Cone, I said, "What do you think about Dr. Cone?" And his response was, "He's Paul.
He's the apostle to the Gentiles." Yeah. So look, here's what I would say about that. Number one, the whole 5th chapter is me trying to put Clegg and Cone into a righteous conversation. Yes. Their relationship is complicated. My predecessor, the Reverend Dr. Jeremiah Wright, knew both of them. So I reached out to him. This is well after the book was published, but I was just curious. I reached out to him and asked him, like, what was their relationship like? Because I see what some of us might call shade being thrown back and forth. Like, for instance, like one of the things that really motivated me to do a deeper dive in this, having known about Cone and having read Black Theology and Black Power prior to even being introduced to Clegg, when I go back and look, I'm like, oh yeah, okay, Clegg, so he's in Detroit. Cone is in Albion. He's talking about Detroit. I know he's saying something about that. Man wrote one sentence about Clegg in Black Theology and Black Power.
But Clegg was all wrapped up in Black Theology and Black Power.
Cone says as much in I said I wasn't gonna tell nobody, right? It's almost like a deathbed confession. Like, yes, I was getting this stuff from Albert Clegg, right? So, matter of fact, when I talked to Bishop Kamathi and Bishop Chewy, and they described Cone's interactions at the shrine, they said he was such a regular at the shrine, especially during their Bible studies. And he would be sitting in the back, quiet, taking copious notes, so much so they thought he was a federal operative. So there is definitely a whole lot of fodder for discussion and interrogation about their relationship. But I think it's beautiful insofar as this is concerned. Cone definitely amplifies Black liberation theology in an academic context. Clegg is implementing Black liberation theology in a congregational context. So
you use the term preacher in action.
Yeah, preaching in action is something that he used as like the center that he would be trying to create these satellite locations where he would train people on how to do preaching in action.
Right.
So what I think is real valuable is for preachers, for pastors, not divorcing ourselves from the flesh and blood, couch and kitchen reality of our congregants in the name of Black theology. See, some of this Black theology, Black liberation theology, and other theological discourse and theories sound great until you have to sit with Mother so-and-so, or Deacon and Elder such and such, or their children who are going through some things daily, and they're not trying to hear about eschatology. They're not trying to hear about, Christology and different doctrinal Eurocentric ideologies in religion. So I think that Clegg is irreplaceable because there's no other pastor. Number one, he coined the term Black liberation theology. He coins the term, okay? Number two, the forerunner in the academy, the apostle to the Gentiles, let Clegg tell it, is grounding his theological and theoretical and academic work in what Clegg is doing. Not just writing about, not just saying, but what Clegg is doing. And there's nobody else with that type of theological impact on Black liberation theology that is serving in the pastorate in that long time. The only other person that would be probably close to it is J. Alfred Smith out of California. But still, I don't think most people would. And that's somebody who I even encourage to try to do some sermonic mining of J. Alfred Smith too. But Clegg is irreplaceable in that regard.
Yeah, there would be no Cone if there was not there was not a Clegg.
Especially not like the Cone we know now.
Well, definitely not. I mean, we already lift up, Cone Barth. There's always this Cone and Barth piece. Someone needs to do a piece in reference to Clegg, Barth, Cone in terms of the production of who Cone becomes, what Kyle Cone writes, and all this framing. And the other thing that I think is really interesting around Cleage is the theological growth. I know you focus on the Black Messiah,
Mm-hmm.
but the theological growth and transformation, we talked a little bit about it offline, if you want to share, is pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, I say that this way because there are a lot of things that I want to try to track and chart insofar as Cleage theology is
Mhm.
concerned. In fact, originally when I got into the program, I thought I was just going to do the rhetoric and theology of Albert Cleage Jr., but that was just too large of a project. More recently, I've recovered all of the articles Cleage wrote in the Michigan Chronicle. He actually had a column that he would write regularly.
Okay.
So you could track some of that. The sermons in the Black Messiah kind of almost freeze Cleage in a particular period of time. But even in that particular period, as you and I talked about offline, he would be very progressive. You know, he was ordaining women before most Black preachers was. He was, you know, pretty much on the right side of every social justice issue and political issue of his day. He was unapologetic and unyielding in his support of the Black Power movement, even insofar as arguing that the Black revolutionaries are the quintessential Christians. But what I'm curious about that I haven't been able to nail down yet is how much of that stuff evolves by the time Black Power ends. His last book is Black Christian Nationalism. It was written and published in 1972, but he pastors all the way till 2000. So I'm in the process of trying to uncover some of the sermons that he was preaching in the 70s and the 80s. You know, I want to know what he was saying about apartheid. I mean, I think I pretty much know, you know,
Right.
he's clearly going to be on the side of um, overruling apartheid in South Africa. But I want to know what he's saying about some of the other things that's happening too. What did he say about the rise of hip hop music? Some of the other things. So I think it's kind of
That would be, yeah, that would be, I can't, this is part two. I'm looking for part two.
all right.
Because that will be a fascinating conversation. Because one of the things that fascinated me in terms of his life and the trajectory are really two pieces. One, I'm Black Christian nationalist. Okay, we got you. I'm a Pan-Africanist. We got you. We're the Shrine of the Black Madonna. But the idea of building an actual alliance with the Ethiopian Orthodox Church.
Yes.
That was fascinating to me to take that next step from the United Church of Christ and he to the Ethiopian Orthodox,
Yeah.
and never fully left the United Church of Christ because
Right.
his retirement was still a part of the UCC.
Yes. Yeah. He said he Black, he ain't stupid. That's right. Jeremiah, right. But for those who don't know, he starts the denomination, the Pan-African Orthodox Christian Church, that is still in existence to this day. So that's the network of the shrines and some of the congregations that the PAOCC have adopted, like Abyssinian, you know, and like Pleasant Hope in Baltimore and Dr. Heber Brown. So I think he was making those moves, as you talk about his theological evolution or trajectory. He was making those moves to expand his reach to actualize the type of Pan-African theological network that he thought could ultimately empower and liberate Black folks, not just, you know, at home, but also abroad. But I do think he was, you know, intentional in prioritizing what was happening. And this is something I feel like we lose sight of today. The desire for national movements, which are necessary, the desire for global solidarity, which is valuable, oftentimes compromises or forfeits the need to establish these networks locally.
Yes.
So he never forsook what was happening in Detroit, what was happening locally with the people in the immediacy of, you know, Shrine Number One, as they call it. Yes, he expanded these things nationally, but I think he still had a keen eye for the reality about all politics being local. And I want to say, to some degree, all theology is local too.
Now we have a question, and I have to for a short little brief commercial. Hey, you want to pick up a copy of this book? You go to Afroware Books. Hey, it's a sister who owns it. We're going to support our own. She manages our bookstore, Trinity United Church of Christ, and she has another site in Oak Park, Illinois. Make sure that you pick up a copy. Now, I mentioned this is an academic book. It was not devaluing in any way, shape, or form, but I just want people to make sure that they know that they're not opening up Max Lucado. They are opening up Dr. Earle Fisher, and they're going to get some great information, because sometimes people are like, wait a minute, I wanted a simple devotion. This is not a devotion, but it will help you design your devotions. So we want to make sure that you pick up a copy, go to Afroware Books, and in the process, buy some others, buy some gifts for some people. Hey, Black History Month is here. Wait a minute, history? Yeah, March. Yeah, April. Yeah, every month is Black History Month if you're still Black. So it's just Black women this year. So let's just continue on and make sure that you purchase. We have a question from Leonard. His question is, we are so rooted in tradition. How do we deconstruct Eurocentrism, or what I call plantation theology, in the Black church?
Yeah, I think this is a step in that direction. Claire would call it slave theology. So one of the ways we do it is through a robust program that introduces our people to the ways in which we have been white evangelical theology, which is so close and wed to white supremacy that you can't really tell them apart. That, we have to try to design the program such that we are introduced to these alternative ways of thinking. And more, one of the things Cleage is doing with his explicit Jesus is Black piece is pulling us back to the geographical origins of Christianity.
Yes.
So he is saying that Christianity.
Say it again. Say it again for the people in the back, please.
Yeah, look, he's pulling us back to the origins of Christianity, even before the Ethiopian Orthodox Christian Church and all of that, right? Even before Coptic Christianity. Christianity at its origins is an African traditional religion. Jesus is a Northeastern African. He's born so close to Egypt, he could walk to get there. So part of what I think we do.
Went to elementary school there.
Yeah. Went to the nurseries in Egypt, right? And they could clearly tell no difference between him and the rest of the Black Egyptian babies.
Right.
So my point is, when we can circle people back to the origins, and Cleage attempts to do this, I think it helps to deconstruct the Eurocentric influence or the Constantinian influence on Christianity that continues to plague us to this day.
Now back up. I want people to hear. I mean, you are dropping diamonds and pearls, to quote Prince, left and right. Let everybody know, when you say Constantinian, what are you speaking about?
So the irony of the Jesus movement, Cleage points this out in some ways, and there are other resources that I think make this conversation even more robust and valuable. So Jesus's movement, Jesus's revolutionary movement, Cleage would say, Jesus' attempt to establish a Black nation, is in complete opposition to the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire executes him. Cone would say lynches him. Matter of fact, Cleage said Jesus was lynched before Cone did, but I don't have time to go down that rabbit hole. But the Roman Empire executes Jesus, and then the Roman Catholic Church becomes the universal church, the site for the universal church. Isn't that ironic? It happens because of Emperor Constantine, that makes Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire, because according to some, he has a dream where he sees two Greek symbols, chi and rho, and he says, by this sign we shall conquer. And so he has the Roman soldiers put that sign on their fatigues, and then they go into battle and win. Others say there was a peasant revolution, and the zealots got so close to Constantine that they put a sword to his neck, and he said, oh no, I believe. So either way, it's Constantine that really cements the Eurocentric influence and takeover of Christianity that we still see and contend with to this day.
And there's also an artistic change, because then the art changes at the moment that Constantine becomes, quote unquote, the head of the church.
Yes.
So that begins a trajectory of imagery that is blown up, and then the imagery of of the Coptic, of the Ethiopian, of North African is removed, even to the point where Augustine, Origen, Tertullian, all of these are not viewed as Africans
Right.
in the Western framing. And then all of a sudden we've got now it's the white man's religion. And Cleage has already told us they stole this from us and then tried to repackage it. It's like taking sweet potato pie and then making a pumpkin pie and say, here, this is what you get here.
Yes. Another thing that I would add to that is, before George T.M. James talked about stolen legacy, there are people describing the legacy of Black and African religion being stolen by Greeks and Romans as well. So at the end of the day, I think it's important for us to try to reclaim all of that if we are sincerely concerned with the truth. The point you're bringing up, Dr. Moss, is about iconography, and to see the way these images continue to plague our psychology to this day. I can name one of the most prominent Black churches in the African Methodist Episcopal denomination.
All right.
And if you walk into their church today, you will see white Jesus in the background. So, I mean, it's clearly still something that we have to wrestle with and contend with.
Now you have another question here. This is from it says V Lee. I'm not sure if it's Lee or just V. But the question is, I'm just hearing about Christian nationalism. They're making a difference between Christian nationalism and Black nationalism. It drives divisions based on culture. How are you seeing Black nationalism as compared to Christian nationalism? And you may want to redefine again to share with everyone what Black Christian nationalism is for the audience.
So let me try to evoke Cleage first before I veer off into some of my own individual ideas about this thing. So Cleage would say, similar to what Malcolm said in certain iterations of Malcolm's evolution, I'm not arguing for separation. We're already separated. I'm arguing for the full agency of Black people. What Cleage would use as the template to accomplish that agency is Christianity. So that's why you got Black Christian nationalism, because it's a nationalist movement grounded in Christianity seeking to liberate Black folks, Black Christian nationalism. So Black nationalism is the same thing, seeking to accomplish the full agency and empowerment of Black people, but it doesn't center Christianity as the philosophical or political model. Insofar as culture wars are concerned, I think it's important for us to understand how deep and how raw Eurocentric culture runs throughout the globe today, which is why you and I, Dr. Moss, are sitting here on what some might call Al Gore's internet, having a conversation about Black liberation theology and African religion in English. Right. I was with some of my students at Philander Smith. I teach ethics and society in the religion and philosophy department at Philander Smith this morning on Zoom. And I was just asking them to describe some of the ways Afrocentricity is countercultural and why. And we concluded it's countercultural because our culture is a Eurocentric culture. And so that's why we're talking in English. That's why the dress formally is to wear European style suits. So anything that seeks to counter that might be called a culture war, but the only way you establish Eurocentric culture in the first place is through war, which is what maybe it's a culture war happening right now between Ukraine and Russia, because I think somebody said that Ukrainians are just, low-class Russians. Somebody over there said that. I don't really have that much of a dog in that fight, but that's probably what I would think is, how we parse between Black Christian nationalism and Black nationalism. And the whole idea of culture wars, I think, puts us on the defense because it devalues certain cultures above others that establish their cultures as dominant through the war mechanism.
And I think, Lee, you may also be referencing an NPR writer who did a piece on Christian nationalism. And it was really a euphemism for white supremacy. It was not Christianity within the framework that Cleage is talking about, what we're talking about, but but was really just another way of reframing a form of white nationalism. Christian nationalism is basically capitalism in ecclesiastical garments that drinks from a well of white supremacy, where Cleage is talking about a movement that goes back to its particular roots, and specifically for Black people. So I know that there's a lot of language out there where people are using this kind of Christian nationalist, and examining it from the standpoint of a new form of white supremacy, white nationalism, and things of that nature. We've got another question from Randall, from CJ. I'm sorry, CJ. CJ, could Cleage be a valuable tool for evangelism given the era of Black Lives Matter in which we live, Dr. Fisher?
So first, shame on my research assistant, Chris Randall, for posing that question. And I know what he's doing, Dr. Moss.
That's CJ. Okay, I know who CJ is because I saw him on one of your talkbacks.
So he stays trying to lob stuff to me. Part of what he's angling is an essay that I wrote for the Berkeley Forum through Georgetown. It was published on January the 6th, and it's called A Match Made in Heaven, and it's talking about Black Lives Matter and Black liberation theology. So insofar as evangelism is concerned, I think it's important for us to deconstruct what that idea is, because generally, through the lens of Protestant Christianity, white Protestant Christianity, white evangelicalism, it is seen as one group going to another group, this one group that's privileged insofar as divine relationship is concerned, trying to coerce or maybe even persuade another group to accept its doctrines and its beliefs and its philosophies in order to receive the same type of divine favor. However, what I think Cleage is after is not some form of indoctrination, but a form of empowerment and emancipation of Black folks. And if we redefined or reconstituted what evangelism is in the Black church, I think we would see a better relationship between people in the front lines of the social movement of our day and people who claim to be lovers and worshipers of the one who Cleage said, in order to that nothing is more sacred to God than the liberation of Black people. So I do think that Cleage is a valuable tool for evangelism, but we would have to redefine and reinterpret what the role and function of evangelism is, because we don't ever want to do what now the late great Bishop Desmond Tutu is assigned to saying happened with the missionaries who came to Africa, that when they came to Africa, they had the Bible and the Africans had the land. Then the missionaries told the Africans, close your eyes and let's pray. And when they stopped praying and opened up their eyes, the Africans had the Bible and the missionaries had the land. So I don't think that is the type of evangelism we need to be trying to promote.
I'm glad you mentioned that. There's a scholar, Laman Sane, that was at Yale, and he did a thing on translation. He's grew up Nigerian and was Muslim, and then eventually converted to Christianity. And he said something in a class that I had never heard, and it was really interesting, and I had to do some more research in and around it. But he was talking about the Portuguese. And when the Portuguese first came to West Africa, they gave the Bible in the native language of the people they were trying to evangelize. And Sane said, when they translate, when it was in your own language, it also occupies a space in your own theology.
Yes.
And they said, Shango does not want us to be enslaved. And then the Portuguese made the decision that you cannot translate the Bible into the native tongue because you will give them their theology. That thing blew me. I thought that was just brilliant. It blew me away. It was a beautiful piece. You have another question here. This is from Brenda Dixon, who is a part of the Major Taylor Riders, which is a national group of people who ride bikes all across the nation in honor of one of the greatest athletes ever, by the name of Major Taylor. I know there's a lot of MJ folks out there, Muhammad Ali. Major Taylor did stuff that other people had no idea. But Sister Dixon asks, help me understand why historically the Romans claimed Jesus as the head of their church after lynching him. It changes color. I don't understand the combination of the politics and religion. I feel like I'm missing something.
Man, that's a rich question. It's rich In part because I think it gets at the heart of one of my primary claims in the book, which is all theology is political. So I say in the book that all theology is experiential because it takes place in human experience. It's contextual. Here's where politics get in. It's contextual because that human experience takes place in a social, political, geographical, chronological, and cultural context. And that it is rhetorical because you have to find a way to communicate your understanding of that experience in that particular context. So where we have been taught to our own detriment to divorce or disconnect religion and politics, our oppressors have taken the liberty to continue to wed them. So now we're always trying to compartmentalize with our theology over here and our religion over here. White Christian nationalists aren't doing that right now. Now they're distorting the gospel,
Right.
but they are not trying to divorce religion and politics. In fact, when George Bush got ready to invade Iraq looking for weapons of mass destruction, he said he prayed about it. So, I mean, I don't think that there's the type of distinction between religion and politics that we have been conditioned to try to impose. And I think, again, it works to our detriment. So if you see religion as a tool of political empowerment, then you can understand why some even unjust and heinous organizations, institutions, and entities and nations would use the religion, because Cleage would say nobody can engage in a revolution until you first develop a revolutionary theology, which is to say you have to fundamentally believe that the God that created the universe empowers you to fight for your freedom by any means necessary. That's hard to do if you still disconnect your religion and your theology.
So why do they lynch and also change his color? Brenda wants to know. She wants to understand why this. Why does this happen?
Yeah, well, you lynch him because he's working against the maintenance of the Roman Empire. Reza Aslan would call Jesus a zealot. I think it's John Crossan or something like that would call Jesus a revolutionary. This is what Cleage is calling him, a political revolutionary. So you lynch him because the same reason why you lynched the Black revolutionaries of our day, from Medgar and Malcolm and Martin, right? So that's why you lynch him. You change the color because you understand the power of the prophetic office of Messiah. So if you can make the Messiah in your own image, then that motivates you to fight for your freedom. If the Messiah is made in the image of the oppressor, it makes you much more docile and passive. So I think it's just a war strategy, to put it in another way. That's why they did it. They knew how powerful the Black Messiah is and decided to change the Black Messiah into the white savior. Or I think it's Jackie Grant or I think it's Jackie Grant who says it's white woman's Christ and Black woman's Jesus.
Right. Now we have a question from Christopher Huff. Says, how do Eurocentric Christianity values, or Christian values, differ from Afrocentric Christian values? What would the Black Messiah say about this?
That's beautiful too. And I mean, I didn't get into it in the book as much as I wanted to, but Cleage is clear that white Christianity is rooted in Pauline theology, which is radically individualistic, but the Black Christianity, or the religion of the Black Messiah, is Afrocentric and much more communal. Cleage would say, similar to some of the claims that Dr. Aubrey Hendricks is making in some of his work, especially his new book about Christians against Christianity, there is no term for individual in Hebrew, that it is the collective. So there is no individual salvation. There is only a
people in the back. Say it again.
That man said, tell the DJ bring it back. Aubrey is arguing the same thing a lot of people are arguing, and that is, in the ancient Hebrew faith tradition, there is no concept of individual salvation. It is only communal liberation. So that's one of the fundamental differences between Eurocentric Christian values and Afrocentric Christian values. Cleage, myself, others, I mean, there's plenty of people who make these arguments. They're saying that Eurocentric Christianity is rooted in the well-being of the individual, not the well-being of the broader community. So Jesus becomes, in Eurocentric Christianity, my personal savior.
Right.
All I have to do is recite the right creed or accept the right doctrine, which you can't even prove whether I accepted it or not, other than I said so, or maybe I signed my name on a roll, and then I'm good. Where Afrocentric Christianity is much more about a collective practice, a communal praxis. And so those are some of the fundamental differences in value.
Now, it's interesting that you would say that. Jim Wallace said something. We had him several years back
Yeah.
book signing,
Mhm.
and he said something in a conversation that was fascinating. He said, "I can't be white and Christian because my whiteness gets in the way of Jesus."
Yep.
I thought it was one of the most concise ways of talking about
Yeah.
white supremacy that I've heard anyone say. And then he went on to say that I'm white in America, but when I land in England, they ask me if I'm Scottish.
Yep. Yep. That goes back into the culture piece, the value piece, so many other things. In fact, I blame our dear brother, Reverend Dr. Starsky Wilson, when Jim Wallace wrote his more recent book, Christianity in Crisis. He asked me to come and do a response to it, and to which, in essence, I was saying, if you've been Black in America for 15 minutes, your Christianity has always been in crisis. So tell our white brothers and sisters, welcome to the club.
Welcome to the club. And Tony has a question. Since we were all made by God, how did racism occur in the beginning of the Jesus flight or fight to teach? Plight. I'm sorry, it's plight. Plight to teach.
So I really want to yield that to you, but since I'm the guest, I'm gonna go ahead and say I'm gonna go ahead and say it this way. So first, let's talk about the inception of race and racism. It didn't exist in Jesus's day. Bigotry does, the patriarchy as we understand it does, and a lot of social isms existed in Jesus's day, but racism doesn't exist until about the 15 or 1600s, depending upon which scholar you're going to cite. And so even though there is ethnic bias and bigotry, we see that between the Egyptians and the Hebrews in the Old Testament. You see it all throughout different historical accounts all over Africa. What you don't see is race being prioritized or race being privileged, depending upon the color of one's skin. So I would say, yes, we are all made by God. We are also made by God and birthed into a social and political and cultural context that God is well aware of. And as such, God empowers us to work such that the love of God is made manifest in the lives of all of God's people. And in order for that to become a reality, or as the model prayer would say, for God's will to be done on earth as it is in heaven, as long as we don't believe there's racism in heaven, we have to work to make sure that there's no racism on earth. So that's
even Madison said, teach Dr. Fisher. I got to say it like he would say, teach Dr. Fisher. Okay.
That's Reverend David Madison. I got some good people who are on here cheering me on, making me think I know what I'm talking about.
That's wonderful. Dorothy Bryant also came on just to say this is a wonderful dialogue to have an opportunity to share information. Thank you, Madam Dorothy. We certainly appreciate you. You can post in the chat. We still have some time. I have to take another break. I have to tell you, if you want to pick up Dr. Fisher's book, hold on, wait a minute. I got to give you some visuals. There you go. Okay, you've got to get Reverend Albert Blake Jr. Come on, there we go. You go to Afroware Books. Come on, buy from a sister. Don't buy from Jeff Bezos. He's got enough money. See, I love Cleo because Cleo is our production person. And I say that she is like the wizard of StreamYard, and she just puts things before us appropriately on such a beautiful level. Dr. Fisher, could I get you to read a portion of your book, maybe beginning in chapter 3, just for a paragraph there, so people can get a context to hear your voice and the words that you've written?
I'd be honored to do that. You sure I need to read chapter 3?
Well, you can pick any chapter you want to. I was just thinking that chapter 3 might give people a really great context and introduction.
Here's what I think might give it to them. This is on page 11 on the introduction.
Oh, okay.
This is a section called the historical context of the Black Messiah.
Yes. Okay.
Without a doubt, the 1960s were a tense time in the United States politically and otherwise. During that period, many figures emerged into the social spotlight, espousing different theories and ideologies that would have a significant effect on the trajectory of America in general and Black America more specifically. There was not a more controversial, complex, and compelling figure than the Reverend Albert Cleage Jr. In the 1969 memoir / biography, Poet, Prophet of the Black Nation, Ward introduces readers to a militant and meek, brash and beloved, thoughtful and trivial pastor. Ward describes Cleage as, quote, probably the most hated man in Detroit by all reckoning, including his own, end quote. Despite the disdain that Cleage garnered, or maybe even because of it, his persona, philosophies, and rhetorical projections are quite compelling. Ward goes on to say, quote, for political analysts, sociologists, and economists, this practical prophet who talks of a revision of society, the economy, and a process, if not dialectic, that does not exclude revolution, must hold some fascination, end quote. These talks are captured in the Black Messiah.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you for
We have gone past the 8 o'clock hour. If there are other questions, you're still more than welcome to post them. We would continue. If you post them, we will certainly ask those questions. But we've had an incredible dialogue tonight with none other than Dr. Earle Fisher. He is the pastor of the Abyssinia Church in Memphis, Tennessee, the blackest church in Memphis and in Shelby County. He is also a professor at the Memphis Theological Seminary. And we have another question, none other than Kevin Tyson, our local activist and advocate. How do we work with the assimilated Black churches to adapt Black liberation theology in their teaching, preaching, practice, and community activism?
Thank you for that wonderful question, Brother Kevin. Let me first say, I'm not convinced that all churches need to be worked with, but you do need a critical mass. And I think we have to be mindful of honoring people where they are as we guide them to where we feel like we need them to be, because all of us start somewhere. I didn't start off as some Black liberation theologian, Dr. Moss. I think you could say the same, right? We don't start there. Somebody not only introduced us to the ideas and concepts, but journeyed with us. I think about my mentors like Reverend Dr. Valerie Bridgman and Dr. Barbara Holmes. You know, I said already, Dr. Frank Thomas and Randall Bailey. So I think it's important for us to work with them and be mindful that it does not happen overnight. It's going to take a long period of time. You got to be in sincere relationship with people too, not some transactional relationship that I think too often we try to foster and want some immediate return on a inadequate investment. So some of these churches are deeply assimilated because they don't know any better. And some of them are just simply committed to the oppression of Black people. You got to learn the difference and kind of sort of be sure not to cast your pearls to swine.
There's some things on your plate you don't need to eat, and some things you should never put on your plate.
Yes,
and some things don't need to be in the refrigerators if you're going to eat it later on.
And some of them usually eat in moderation, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a great answer. John, thank you thank you very much. He says, thank you. Sonia, thank you so very much. Raymond, I think he was from New York. He was just really appreciative of the dialogue. And we thank everyone for being with us for our book notes with Dr. Earle Fisher.
Thank you for
I want you to
having
pick up a copy of his book, share the information. Hey, when you get a copy of the book, this is what we want you to do. Take a copy of the book. You take a picture of it. You put it on your social media and say, I got a copy. And guess what? When you read the book, put another picture up there and said, I read the book. Okay. And then pass it on to somebody. Sometimes people pick up books. They don't ever read them. They just show that they got the book. And so we want you to support this Black author, this brilliant, brilliant, brilliant scholar, one of our most brilliant minds in the country, who is teaching and doing just incredible work. I want to share with you that our next book notes will be with Dr. Jackie Lewis, who is the pastor of the Middle Collegiate Church in New York. She wrote a book, Fierce Love, and we are looking forward to that conversation. That's the finishing out the whole series of our book notes, but we will have some other authors coming forth, and we're going to be adding film notes. There is a special conversation we're going to work out. The folks behind the scenes are like, what is Pastor Moss talking about right now? I was just in a conversation with a filmmaker here in Chicago, and they have done research on a film from 1898 entitled Something Good, Negro Kiss. It's the first time ever recorded on film of a Black couple kissing. And it has completely just blown people out of the water because it was filmed in Chicago. So the first time that ever occurred, and this is not some minstrel kiss. These are two individuals who are sharing their love for each other and the history around that particular film. So we're going to be looking at some of those pieces, some other films, some other pieces of art. We'll also be looking at some other books. And thank you so very much for all of the encouragement around book notes. We just started this a few weeks ago, and the communication has been overwhelming of people saying that they want more. You can pick up all of these conversations on YouTube. If you want to hear this conversation again with myself and Dr. Fisher, all you have to do is just check out YouTube. If you want to hear the conversation with Shaka Senghor, check out YouTube, or with Lisa Sharon Harper, check out YouTube. And of course, our upcoming conversation with Dr. Jackie Lewis from the Middle Church in New York, just check out YouTube. Again, make sure that you use the hashtag OM3 Book Notes. We're just trying to educate, inspire, and transform your mind, and of course, the community. So thank you for being with us tonight. And Dr. Fisher, we thank you, man. You are amazing, brother. Thank you for the work that you're doing. And continue to keep on. And the people at Abyssinia certainly have an incredibly gifted pastor. Eyes have not seen, ears have not yet heard what the glory of the Lord will reveal. Hey, you all in Memphis, Blackest Church in Memphis, from the Blackest Church in Chicago, get that you're not yet unwrapped by the name of Dr. Fisher, and we certainly appreciate you. Thank you very much for being with us for Book Notes.